Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
Positronic Hypersonic.
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It was called 4.5 Vulcans. And as the episode starts, Enterprise heads to Paramenti 3, I think they said, for crew shore leave, but Una is declining to participate for an unknown reason, which La'an is trying to suss out unsuccessfully. Before they can get there, it turns out that there's this planet that is aware of Vulcans because the Vulcans contacted them before they came up with their non-interference theory. But they're not aware of other societies, so when they need help in a hurry, 4 members of the crew, namely La'an, Chapel, Uhura, and Pike, have to become Vulcan via the use of a serum derived by backwards engineering a serum that was used on Spock to make him human a number of episodes back in a prior season, which will actually make them Vulcan physiologically and give them all of the Vulcan emotional discipline that Vulcans who have spent decades achieving same would have, because even though this society is pre-warp, they would be able to suss out cosmetic changes when they scan their new arrivals, I guess. And so the crew has to do this in order not to further contaminate their development. After completing the assistance mission comically fast, the crew returns to the ship, but are unable to turn back into being human for some reason. It's then determined that they shouldn't leave the ship to partake in shore leave in their current condition. Following this, Lieutenant James Kirk beams over, and after finding out that his brother is already down on the shore leave planet, rather than going down to the planet to hang with him, even though his original intention was to hang with his brother, he decides to stay on Enterprise and have a drink with Scotty and La'an, during which Scotty and Kirk seem to notice that she's behaving unsettlingly aggressively. Despite the fact that Nurse Chapel figures out how to fix the serum that will turn them back into humans, the 4 newly Vulcan crew members say that they are not willing to go back to being human anymore, which soon proves problematic, prompting other members of the crew to have a private discussion about how to get them to turn back in the chief engineer's quarters, which the characters go out of their way to say can't be scanned or spied on from outside. Captain Pike soon discovers that La'an is working in a Jeffries tube, and at this time they have a conversation in which he points out that she's not behaving like a typical Vulcan before he proceeds to bring up something about Vulcan history that he's not supposed to bring up, prompting her to say that she's also aware of something about Vulcan history that she's not supposed to bring up, after which they both blurt out the word Romulan and decide not to talk about it anymore. Meanwhile, Uhura has been training Humberto on how to be more logical, much to his sister's dismay, especially when she learns that Uhura mind-melded with him to facilitate this. Spock then stumbles upon Nurse Chapel having a breakup call with Dr. Corby, after which she decides not to be friends with anyone anymore because socialization is inefficient. Meanwhile, La'an has apparently decided that the Enterprise doesn't have enough weapons or powerful enough weapons, and that she wants to change that. Una reaches out to her ex-boyfriend, who happens to be a Vulcan Katra expert named Doug, who happens to live on the planet they're orbiting, which explains why she didn't want to go on shore leave there, and with whom she happened to have a passionate relationship at the time. And it turns out that Doug and his parents have quite the affinity for humans for some reason. La'an then informs Lieutenant Kirk and Scotty that she's come up with the devious plan to start a war involving the Klingons, the Orions, and I think she said the Romulans, and when Scotty and Kirk refuse to help her do this, she threatens to kill them. Captain Patel, meanwhile, freaks out towards Captain Pike and the Vulcan Admiral, who gets to decide whether or not she goes back to work, and it results in him deciding to promote her sometime later to take over as head of the judicial branch of Starfleet, much to her surprise. After being helped by Doug, Spock connects with the Katras of 3 of the new Vulcan crew members, who realize they don't want to stay Vulcan, but when he tries the same with La'an, she becomes combative, at which point they dance about it, and she decides, ultimately, to go ahead and be changed back. Uhura apologizes to Umberto for mind-melding him into compliance with her wishes, and Christine offers a mea culpa to Dr. Corby. Una and Lon then talk about Una's past with Doug, and it seems that she has apparently yet again rekindled things with Doug, her prior on and off again boyfriend. Kirk and Scotty share a drink and agree that they make a pretty good team. In a mid-credit scene, Spock and Doug practice and discuss human things like high-fiving and so forth, and Spock smiles at the end. And that's where the whole episode ended. So I really didn't like this episode. In fact, I really disliked it. And that isn't to say that there weren't entertaining aspects of it and there weren't entertaining moments, because there were. But first of all, it was loaded with badly explained or barely explained contrivances that reek of writers who just are at the bottom of the barrel of their creativity. Let's start with this. Why is this society still a pre-warp society if they've met the Vulcans? And the reason is because they needed them to be familiar with the Vulcans, but not familiar with any other races, so that they could have this sudden need to turn the crew into Vulcans. So it's a contrivancy that is very stupid, and it just was obvious from the jump that that's what it was, because it's ridiculous. And I say it's ridiculous because the Vulcans only introduced themselves to Earth when they saw that Earth was in fact developing warp drive. So, okay, this must mean that they visited them at a time before they had even come up with that rule. So that's fine, but that would have been 100 years ago. Why is this society still pre-warp? The only reason is because they needed them to be, because the script says so. Other than that, it doesn't make sense. And they obviously know about warp drive. So even if they hadn't developed it for themselves for some reason, why would it matter if they were exposed to other races besides the Vulcans and gained the knowledge that other races also exist, other planets? Are we really supposed to believe that they wouldn't have automatically thought that there were multiple other inhabited planets in the galaxy the moment they met the Vulcans? And it just doesn't make sense. Why would they bother scanning people that beam down or that come down? They don't think any other off-worlders exist. I mean, I guess we're supposed to think it's just something they do as a matter of routine, and that it would have shown up, that the crew members were human, really, whether they were looking to see whether they were really Vulcan or not, I guess. But again, it's a contrivancy. It's there so that they had to make them actually Vulcan versus make them look Vulcan. It's just a plot contrivancy that they had no choice but to write into the script. Otherwise, it would have been a plot hole, potentially. And so when you can see the wheels turning like that, it's just bad writing. And, originally when I saw the clip from this episode a while back when it was first released as a tease, I was like, wait a minute, how does a serum turn them into Vulcans, not only physiologically, but also, psychologically and mentally? And I thought, oh, they're just not going to explain it. They did offer an explanation, but the explanation is stupid. They said that the original serum that turned Spock human was based on his perceptions, his mind in particular. So when they reverse engineered it, it automatically made the crew members people who had the same kind of mental control and mental acuity or whatever as Vulcans who had studied to have that for years. What? That's ridiculous. That's junk science. They just should have said it was magic. They just should have said this potion is magic, because the explanation that they came up with for how it works is just as dumb as magic would have been less dumb, actually. So they just should have said that it was magic. Anyway, one thing they didn't bother to explain about the serum is why it changed the character's hair. Why did it change their hairstyle? It's like, give me a break. Why was Pike carrying one of those Vulcan weapon things, a LARPA, whatever they call it, the Vulcan thing that Spock and Kirk fought with in Amok Time? Why does he have a weapon that he's going on this mission to help this pre-warp society with a scientific problem? Why did they give La'an a phaser rifle to go on this help mission where there isn't a dangerous situation? Once again, we didn't get to see the species on the 2 new planets that were introduced in this episode. 2 new planets, 2 new species. We don't get to see them. At one point, Scotty tells Lon that information she's requesting is information about the ship's power system that he isn't supposed to share with anyone, but then he does because she's technically his boss, and I don't understand why the chief security officer wouldn't be able to see information on any part of the ship. That doesn't make any sense. For some ridiculous reason, The now Vulcan crew members decide to stay in their Vulcan garb that they put on for the help mission, even though they were still on duty on Enterprise, which would not have been done. They would have been made to put on their duty uniforms. But you know what? Forget that, because the idea that these people would be allowed to continue on in their duties in an altered state, that could very well potentially affect them, and which did affect them, in physiological and emotional ways that would have been detrimental to their ability to do their job. So they would have been temporarily taken off duty. So the whole idea that they're even on duty is ridiculous. If you want to have an episode where they're dealing with this change and whatnot for the whole episode, that's fine, but it wouldn't have been while the characters were on duty. It certainly wouldn't be while they weren't in uniform. It was just completely absurd the way they did this. There was absolutely no reason to mention that Pelias' quarters can't be spied on. And even if they were going to mention it, it doesn't make sense that that would be allowed to exist on a starship. It's ridiculous. Vulcans are historically pacifistic, so it makes no sense whatsoever that Luan would go off on a tear about militarizing the Enterprise more. So I think what we're supposed to think is that she got a dose of the Romulan in the shot, which makes no sense whatsoever for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that the serum, as I said before, was based on Spock. If anything, they all should have had an intense emotional streak, not just her. Or if it was based just on his Vulcan side, no emotional streak at all. Never mind one that would be explained as being Romulan-ish. Then there's the thing with Una and Doug. It was completely ridiculous, and there was absolutely no reason why they had to include any of it. Now, was it funny and entertaining? Yes. But it was straight out of an episode of a sitcom, like Friends, or really, The Big Bang Theory. It was like watching an episode of The Big Bang Theory during the scenes about Doug. And speaking of Doug, are we really supposed to believe he was the only Vulcan living on the planet that they went to for shore leave? If not, and there were other Vulcans there, wouldn't they have been close enough to the planet that needed help such that they wouldn't have had to make human crew members into Vulcans in order to help them, which was the excuse that was given, where we wouldn't have had to go through this whole thing? Pelia was in this episode, and she is just a complete joke character, and it's a shame because, you know, the actress is great, but they just turned this character into a joke, and I hate it. For some reason, the Vulcan Admiral was wearing a completely different uniform, like he would have worn during Discovery, which, okay, it's the same era still, but like, why was he wearing that? It didn't make any sense. The mid-credit scene between Spock and Doug, again, was hilarious and very funny, but I just don't buy this whole thing about Doug wanting to be more like humans. And not only that, but, you know, he talks about how his parents were fond of humans and had a thing for humans, and yet he didn't know that humans need 8 hours of sleep a night. It's absurd. The writers have just gone completely off the rails. That's the bottom line. This would have been a great opportunity to explore the relationship between Jim Kirk and his brother, if they absolutely had to involve James Kirk, which they didn't. And barring that, it would have been a perfect opportunity to use the Sam Kirk character in a meaningful way, or at least use him, instead of ramming James in our face yet again. Earlier, I said there were things I liked about the episode. There were. One other thing I liked about it was the poetry of the dance fight part. I really liked that. I thought it was cool, the way they depicted it. And, you know, I did like the silly stuff, as I've been saying. I found it entertaining, but I felt like I was watching an episode of The Big Bang Theory most of the time, where there were 6 Sheldons instead of 1, the 4 changed crew members, Spock and Doug, and everyone else was the rest of the cast interacting with the 6 Sheldons, because they played all of it for humor and didn't take any of it seriously. They played it for the surface absurdity angle of it, not any other angle that might actually have been worthwhile. And, you know, there's a name for that style of story, for the style of story that this was, and that word is farce. This was a farce, a literal farce episode. It was done in the style known as farce. You know, and I can understand having a farcical element to an episode now and then, but they went balls to the wall farce with this, and it's terrible for Star Trek. I like a good farce. it doesn't belong on the USS Enterprise with Spock and Pike and Una. It doesn't. Not as the whole story. If you want to have a farcical B plot to an episode that has a strong A plot that's about the human condition, by all means, go for it. Have a little farcical subplot, but don't make the A plot farce and then not even have a B plot. Like, why didn't they spend some of the time of this episode on the shore leave planet with the other characters? Some of the silly stuff in this episode could have been taken out, and they could have shown the crew on shore leave doing something that examined the human condition somehow, or that involved a morality angle. Why didn't they do that? For example, I think it would have come out better if they'd made it so that one or two of the characters couldn't transform back and had to deal with the Vulcan thing, and then the other two went on shore leave. And like I said, they spent some of the time that they spent showing really stupid stuff, showing those crew members on shore leave, encountering some kind of, I don't know, situation that would, like I said, examine the human condition in some kind of thoughtful way. Because then it's fine, you know, if that side of the story is balanced with something serious. But what they keep doing is full-on episodes that are farcical. And it's really unfortunate. Like, back in season 1, it seemed like they knew how to do these episodes where they could put the characters in far-out situations, like season 1, episode 8, but still have the episode be really good and poignant and thought-provoking. But this was just garbage. It really was, and I hate to use that word, but that's just what this was. It was horrible. And that's really all there is to say. So I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.